Southwest Fire Academy was established in 2015 as a response to the recognized need for quality, safe, and affordable fire and rescue training in Ontario. This is not your average fire college. SFA has high standards for their students, and it is their mission to teach and produce qualified, ambitious firefighters who are prepared to work hard to serve their communities. This is not a diploma mill. This is where you can learn strategic, aggressive firefighting from passionate, intelligent instructors who never forget why they were made to do this job. SFA is an accredited private career college that is regulated by the Ministry of Training, colleges, and universities, with a memorandum of understanding with the Office of the Fire Marshal. This means that SFA is an approved training provider with the OFM, and the programs are recognized in Ontario. Check out their pre-service and expanding selection of course offerings at southwestfireacademy.ca. Hello everyone. Welcome to episode 86 of Multiple Calls. I'm Scott Hewlett. Captain Jeff Clayton once said, "If you could teach people passion for firefighting, you wouldn't have to teach them anything else." Indifferent firefighters are passionate people. They just aren't passionate about firefighting. The job serves a purpose for them, but their interests lie elsewhere. It's true that they could discover it for themselves. People don't know what they don't know. A book, a course, a call, or the right crew could awaken a perspective that they are unaware of, but maybe it won't. Maybe they're happy punching the clock and going through the motions until the pension hits, and then they can go about their lives focusing more on the things that they care about. But it actually doesn't matter. As far apart as the passionate and apathetic may be when it comes to firefighting, they actually have one very important thing in common. They both want every call that they respond to be resolved as quickly as possible. The less you know about the job, the harder it is and the longer everything takes. So even the most checked out firefighter should selfishly want to be as competent and efficient as possible so they can get back to doing what they really care about. And if they happen to think that the job is below them and there's nothing to it, then they should be able to get really good at it with very little effort. Whatever someone's why is doesn't matter. Being good is the best way to hack the system. Here's my chat with Eric Wheaton. All right, we'll kick things off and tell me where you grew up and a bit about your family.
I grew up just north of Orlando, about 20 miles. It's called Sanford, Florida. Grew up in the same house, actually, kind of odd nowadays. I grew up in the same house that my parents bought when they were, I believe they were 18, 19 when they bought it. Still own it today. They still live in the same house. My parents are still married. Smallish town. It's kind of grown a little bit nowadays, just like most cities. But I was in the same bedroom for the first 22 years of my life. Definitely for my generation growing up, that's kind of a pretty unique situation until I bought my first house when I was 22 years old, had a year on the job and bought my first house just downtown in our historic district of that city. Didn't move far from home, just a few blocks really.
And what did your parents do?
So my dad was a firefighter for City of Winter Park and ultimately is where I ended up scoring a job and currently work. Did 31 years there, he did. Retired in 2016. My mom, the city I grew up in, Sanford, has a small international airport, more regional airport when I was growing up, but it's international now. And she just worked at like a local aircraft maintenance hangar there, doing secondary work, running the front office, things like that. So pretty chill job for her. Raising two kids, she can kind of come and go as she pleased. It was less than a mile from the house I grew up in. I mean, you can go hang out at my parents' house now and you'll hear planes fly by all day long. They're that close to the airport. She worked kind of a normal 9-to-5 job, and my dad, like I said, was a firefighter, and he always carried himself with a side job. Always known my dad as having a second job, like most firefighters. But when my mom nowadays gives me a hard time that I'm doing too much, I like to remind her about my dad and all that. So when I get into like playing sports and everything later on in my life, it was really my mom there kind of supporting me as far as that side of things, because my dad was the one bringing in the paycheck mainly.
And you had one sister?
Yeah, one sister, one older sister. I think we're about 6 years apart. Having an older sister, really, she grew up very tomboyish. So When I would get picked on at school at any time, and I'd tell or out in the public or whatever, and I'd say, I'm gonna go get my sister, she's gonna come beat your ass or something. They would all be like, oh, really, a girl? And I'm like, you just wait. Man, my sister always protected me, still to this day. She adores me. We're not as close as probably she would like or the family would like. She left home early. I'd say, I want to say she was about 15. That puts me, what is that, about 9 years old. So I like to say basically from like that point on my life on, I mean, we were taking family vacations and it would just be me and my mom, my dad at that age. I would almost really felt like an only child. My early preteens to all through till I moved out of the house in my early 20s. Felt like an only child. She decided to go down some paths that I know she regrets nowadays with some addictions and things like that, and got help. Had a few roadblocks between those early years of kind of correcting herself and now she's doing good now. She's gone through lots of hardships on herself. She's had a lot of trauma in her life, both self-inflicted as well as she had a very serious boyfriend at the time. She got pregnant really young and ultimately he passed away on an auto accident. Met another guy fairly soon after that, got pretty serious with that and ended up marrying, having another child. And man, I think it was 2019, her husband and father of her daughter died in a motorcycle accident, right? So both of her kids, my niece and nephew, two separate dads, and both fathers died in auto accidents. Between that and just some of those paths that she had before that, it was pretty brutal on her and her family. It's definitely a part of my life that I think has really hardened me up, some in good ways and some in bad. I think it took a lot of my empathy away when people close to me or even in the fire service are going through some struggling times. Like, I think I'm so callous to that I tend to neglect, and especially in a leadership position now, that I should probably do that phone call after shift. And when such and such telling me he's going through divorce or something at work, and I just kind of, I guess because of all my upbringing, I kind of equate that to just basically taking that information in and not letting it affect me and spitting it back out. Because I had to as a kid. I felt like I was the man at the house sometimes, and I would just have to keep the family together. As a young boy, it's affected me now. Pull good traits out of good learning experiences, but there's some things that I suck at that I wish I was better at, and show a little more empathy to people, especially my guys I work with and the people I work with and my family when they're kind of wanting some softness from me. It's kind of, I don't show that all the time.
How was school for you?
It was pretty lousy. I'm not gonna be honest with you. Pretty poor experience with it all from childhood and now having kids. Unfortunately, I'm in a situation where my kids have to go to public school, but if I could change that and do some sort of other type of schooling or even homeschooling would be ideal for me. I would love to. And I think kids like me aren't really set up for that style of learning, to be in a big classroom, 30-ish kids in a room with a teacher that probably doesn't really care much about the kids or being there. I didn't really enjoy it. I wasn't a bad student as far as getting into trouble. I have my little things here and there. I've never really gotten in huge trouble. I got B's and C's. Didn't really apply myself. That kind of normal story of a kid kind of in my circle, my position. Yeah. No interest in school, had zero interest in college. In fact, completely discounted any college at all. I had zero desire for that. And part reason was probably just a lot of my thick-headedness of somebody telling me I had to do it. And I was like, I'm not doing it. As soon as I could in high school, I did OJT, on the job training. And basically, if no one's familiar with that, that's basically you go to school with like your one or two core classes that you basically have to have 4 years of, like a math and an English. And then after that, you can cut out of school and go work and make money. And that program is set up for kids not wanting to go to college, right? Because at your last year or two of high school, everyone's doing college credits to get into college and doing the things to get things ready for college. And if you're not interested in that, you can basically go half the time of school and go make money. And that's what I did. I just cut out of school, would go work till 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then I would hit the beach and go surf. That's basically all I had a desire to do. And I had no plan to ever change anything like that. I had no goals, no as far as education goes or jobs or anything like that. When I was going through high school. But the other thing that really set me off from school, and again, I think I pulled a lifelong lesson out of this, though, was the teachers. I had a lot of teachers that I would butt heads with. And again, a part was probably me and part was probably them. But I had horrible experiences with teachers telling me that you're not going to college. You're going to be a failure to society. You're going to be a surf bum your whole life. You're nobody. I mean, like we'd get in yelling bits, just constantly beat me down. And I like to say it's like that my generation was the one that was like, you have to go to college, but you talk to people that went to school in the 80s and society was like that back then, right? So at the time, it just felt like this old generation telling me that I have to go to college to be successful. And obviously nowadays we know that's not necessarily the case. That kind of hurt, right? I have some adults in my life that are telling me that I'm going to be a loser my whole life. And then all that did was further bury me down into a lack of desire to do anything with my life. But I think at the end, that was motivation to become a lot of the things that I do today.
You mentioned sports there. So what were you involved in as a kid other than surfing?
Yeah, ultimately surfing, and which consumed my life till pre-kids, all the way till I had kids. Yeah, I did your normal sports as a American boy, t-ball, which led to baseball, basketball. I didn't really like any of them. My dad really kind of pushed me to do those sports. In fact, was a coach at some of those teams. I think I was about 11 or 12, and we had a local, when skating rinks were a thing, I had a local skating rink that I would skate at a lot. And ironically, my sister was kind of working there part-time as an early teenager. I'd skate there all the time on the weekends, and they were starting up a hockey league. And it was roller hockey, indoor roller hockey. Back then it was skating on quads. It wasn't like rollerblades or anything like that. I could skate really good. The hockey coach approached me, and I believe my parents too, maybe they were there picking me up, and was asking like, hey, we're starting a league. Your son could skate really well. Do you want to see if he wants to try out? I don't remember how the decision was made, but all I know is I showed up to a practice and here I am, right? So we went to the Play Again Sports in town here and got a bunch of used equipment, and ultimately ended up with a left-handed stick. I'm right-handed, so here I am, show up my first practice looking like a kook, and I got this left-handed stick, and the coach is just like shaking his head. Get through the practice, and he's telling me about all that, and I mean, I'm going through a couple practices, I'm just not getting it. Like, I mean, I could skate really good, and I cannot do anything else that has anything to do with hockey. Getting frustrated, and he kind of approached me, and I said a few words that I look back now, probably back then it wasn't as profound, but I look back now and I actually used what he told me as a guide to doing some mentoring. Got pretty high level hockey, played all the way up until high school. I mean, I'm talking about like traveling every weekend, sponsored, all that is as far as roller hockey could take you. National tournaments and local stuff, and just, it was a good time, a really good time. My mom, again, was a very big instrumental of that, taking me to all the practices, paying for all the fees, going to every weekend game, staying in hotels. And my dad would stay home and work. He'd make a few local events here and there, but mostly it was my mom. I dabbled into lacrosse a little bit in high school because roller hockey is not huge, really, I don't think anywhere, but not in Florida at least, on the roller side. So by high school, you kind of age out of these sports. And so the next closest thing to that for high school sport was lacrosse. And I did lacrosse 1 year, and I hated it. I hated running. I hated working out. I hated all that, like zero desire. So 1 year done, I was benched pretty much every game because it was the first year of lacrosse, and it was a varsity only team, and I was a freshman, right? So they're going to have all the seniors playing. So I was like, I'm doing all this work, don't really enjoy it, and I just sat on the bench whole year. I might have not played one game. Before all that too, I kind of, while I was still playing hockey, I got really into wakeboarding, especially cable wakeboarding. My family could never afford a wakeboard boat at the time, so that was out of the question. So I did cable. The first cable park in the United States was basically 30 minutes from my house. And if anyone's not familiar with that, basically like a big cable system with a rope attached to it with a handle, and it pulls you around in a circle, and there's obviously no wakes to jump. So what you do is hit rails, or that in the sport they call them sliders a lot, and ramps and things like that, and completely bad for knees, by the way, because there's no wake on the other side that can absorb your landing, right? So when you go off a 6-foot kicker and you're 15 feet in the air, you land on the flats, and there's nothing really absorbing your shock there. So did that for a while, had completely destroyed both knees, tears in ACL, MCL, meniscus, issues that I'm facing today. In fact, I got an orthopedic appointment tomorrow. I got some knee issues flaring up on me. In high school, I met, ultimately be my best friend, best man at my wedding, is actually a tiller, we call them tiller operators, but tillerman on my crew, on my shift at my fire department. And it's just kind of crazy full circle. Like we met in 9th and 10th grade, lived in Puerto Rico together, traveled a bunch, did all this cross stuff way before the fire service. And now we work together every day, which is really bonkers. But he got me into surfing, and that basically consumed my life every day. That's all I wanted to do. And that heavily influenced a lot of my day-to-day stuff. Both horrible traits and good traits came from that. Great experiences came from that. But I would neglect everybody, everything. I put surfing ahead of everything. I wouldn't until later on that started to feel maybe like the addiction part of of what I had experienced as a kid comes into play a lot in my life. I just chose to not use those traits with poison and things like that, and more hobbies or jobs, and kind of been my sporting career there.
How long were you in Puerto Rico for?
Just a summer season, but I mean, I consider living because we had a house, we bought a car. We basically were going there 2 or 3 times a year. My friend that I'm talking about, his name's Vance, and he's half Puerto Rican. So, I mean, I think our first trip to Puerto Rico, we were probably 14, 15 years old and flew there with no parents and just figured it out. Like literally, we met some people on an airplane. We were landed 3 hours away from where we wanted to surf, and we hitchhiked with them. Like, it was crazy. I mean, my parents gave me a lot of freedom back then, and that was awesome. But I mean, the experiences that I gained from traveling at a young age like that to these sometimes third world countries. Obviously, Puerto Rico's not classified as third world, but we ultimately would end up at some third world places. But anyways, we travel over there quite often, and we'd stay in a hostel, and the owner of the hostel saw we're young, cool kids and could surf pretty good. And he invited us one summer season. He was like, hey, our surf instructor spot is opening up next summer. Would you like to go? Well, my buddy was still in high school. I'm a year ahead of him. So right when he got out of high school, he was planning on going straight into college, like just a local state college. And he put that on hold, and we bought one-way tickets to Puerto Rico and moved in at this hostel, and basically taught surf lessons and worked around the hostel to make some cash, and then would surf every day. I mean, that's what I did every day for that season. I probably would have stayed there a little longer, but the owners kind of made some broken promises. And again, my attitude at the time was pretty thick-headedness. And one of the regrets I have in life is leaving my best friend there and coming home, tail stuck between my legs. Now that I'm mature, I would have handled that differently to continue on that life experience. But it is what it is, and it's still a good time.
Do you have any other jobs ahead of the fire service?
My first job was a car washer / detailer. I got in the detail side of things. I think probably the owner saw me as not a drug addict. And I don't know if it was just where I worked, but car wash is kind of just obviously an entry-level job, and they just kind of, I don't know. I feel like it's similar to like restaurant industry, right? They kind of brings in those type of people. And I saw what stuff like that did to my family, and I wanted nothing to do with that. So I definitely stayed away from that. And so they brought me over the detail side. And so I got kind of moved up to detailing a lot of cars pretty early on. And then I got a job due to a good friend at the time's mom was pretty high up in the company at a local like hardware tool distributor. Quickly, same thing. The managers kind of trusted me, put me in a management position at like 17, 18 years old. And I was a receiving manager. So I basically would take and offload the delivery trucks and put them in the receiving area and basically make sure it matches the items match the packing slip. And then I would get the people that fill the shelves to come over and pick it up, and they'd fill the shelves, and then other people would pick orders. And so I was just kind of in charge of all the product coming into the warehouse. And I had that. That was probably my longest running job before the fire service. That's what I did during the OJT of high school and all that. But really, after all that, and I'd stopped doing that because, again, surfing was starting to consume my life. I just would actually just work little jobs here and there just to make enough money to where I could travel. And then I would just usually buy a one-way ticket. Maybe I'd have a round-trip ticket if I kind of knew how long I was going to stay in one place. And I'd take my surfboards and a couple board shorts and just go until I ran out of money and I needed to come home. And I'd come home, and any quick way of getting a job, any connection I had where I didn't have to try was how I would go. So if I knew a friend that was a manager at Best Buy, I worked at Best Buy for a month. My mom worked at the airport, so I would go sweep the floors for her company she worked for, and then I'd save up money, and then I would leave. She knew the people who did the grounds maintenance at the airport, so then I would go mow lawns for the airport for 6 months, and then I would just that kind of stuff. All I wanted to do was surf. It went till later on that I even dabbled into the fire service.
Yeah, how much did your dad expose you to the fire service?
Pretty much zero. He's a baby boomer, right? So my parents are baby boomers. He comes from a pretty strong background in military, his family. His mom and dad, my grandma and grandpa both were in the Navy, and one of his sisters was also in the Navy. My father was never in the military. But where I'm going with that is you got these World War II era generation, right? The greatest generation. And I believe they wouldn't come home and tell their kids many stories. They wouldn't tell many war stories. I mean, my grandpa landed in during D-Day on Normandy as a Navy corpsman, and I mean, he has. If you asked him, he's no longer alive. But if you asked him, he'd tell you the stories, but he would just wouldn't flat out say it. And I mean, you have stories of grabbing the wounded and casualties and bringing them back onto the amphibious boats. If you guys can think of Saving Private Ryan, right? So obviously that's a dramatic version of that, but like those boats that would just barge up onto the sand and drop the doors. And well, he said he would be the corpsman that would be in the very back of that. So all the infantry would run out first, basically get lit up, and then his job was just run behind and grab as many people as he could to bring back on that boat, and then the boat would go back to the Navy ship, the Navy hospital offshore. And he'd tell me stories like he'd come back and those boats would be knee high of blood of just like all the wounded he was bringing back. So, right, he's got crazy stories, right? But not sharing it with my dad. I think my dad's the same way, right? He was firefighter in the 80s and 90s, the tail end of those war years. And if he would came back and told me, from shift and told me some cool fire stories and stuff like that, he would tell funny stories, fun medical calls or something like that. That was funny, but nothing I saw in it that I ever thought I would want to do that. It was nothing impressive. And I think it was just his upbringing. I didn't have that fairy tale. I like to tell people I don't have that fairy tale father son. I knew I was going to. I should start by how I even heard about the fire service. Like that was an option for me. Was we were in the Bahamas on a family vacation, and my dad brought two of his buddies from Winter Park Fire Department. They were all friends. And I brought my surfboard. I was surfing there, and I came in from the beach, and these two guys, one still works there today. He's actually, I work with him on my shift, and one retired a couple years ago. They're like, "Hey, Wheaton, what are you going to do with your life, man?" And my dad wasn't even near him. I don't even know if my dad teed this up for him or not. But they're like, "What are you going to do with your life?" I'm like, "This. I don't care. Like, I just want to surf. I don't want to go to school. I don't want to really have a hard job." I was basically becoming that surf bum that everyone told me I was going to. They're like, "Hey, dude, you can like get a job with the fire department, work one day and have 2 days still do this, and you have a career." And I was like, "Oh, I never even thought of that." Right. So like and when I got back from the trip, I signed up for school, and it's crazy for how in I am to the job now. Like at that point in my life, it was all, I got in the job because I wanted to surf. And I could have a job where it was considered a career, and people lay off my back because, okay, hey, now I have a career. It was steady money, and I could surf 2 out of 3 days. That's how I got into that. Right there. Pretty crazy for where I'm at now in this job.
So what was the process of getting on like, and what was that experience for you, not wanting to you weren't fully mentally engaged in the type of work? But you had a work ethic, like you would grab jobs and do work. So how was that process for you?
I did, but I mean, comparing like work ethic now to then, it's not like I was out in the streets asking for free money. I mean, I would work, but nothing like now. Basically, in the state of Florida, you have to attend a state college to get your certifications. And you have to be a minimum of EMT. And Florida's kind of known to be an extremely hard state to transfer from another state into, because the minimum standards are, I guess, held to a little higher standard than the rest of the states. You have to go through EMT first. So mind you, I have been out of school now 2 or 3 years at the time. Of that, the last 2 years of my high school were not really school, right? It was just a quick in and out of school to go work, right? So for me, I'd been out of school for a while. I never applied myself, had never studied once. I've never studied for a test at this time, nothing. I just always did my homework and classwork because I knew I wasn't going to study for a test, and I would just bomb the test. But my homework and classwork grades kept me at a C level at least. I struggled through EMT because I had zero desire in anything medical. I had no desire in that. I was just checking that box that I had to become a fireman. I struggled. Took me a long time to pass the state test. Finally did. Again, an EMT class went till like 1 p.m. So I was stoked because I would just and my parents were happy. They're like, hey, you can stay at home and we'll pay for your car insurance, your gas, like everything. They were fully fronting me at this time of my life. And I was like, hell yeah, I'm going to go to school till 1, blow that off like I did in high school and go surf. It wasn't until fire school that I walked in that door, and I had the class that I went to was taught by people from the Orlando Fire Department, right? Steve Negley, Matt Negley, JJ Cassetta, Ken Rinaldi. A lot of these names people know now, right? Of course, I didn't know back then, right? You want to talk about like first impressions? I mean, I was like, and Matt Negley, he was all into like band, right? So band people are like almost like military, like proper. So had me out there like this. I had no structure like that in my life. JJ Cassetta and the guy who ran the program, Mike Aiken, who locally is a legend, was retired as a district chief of the city of Orlando and kind of bounced around to other departments. Crazy enough, his nephew and me were good friends as kids. So he kind of saw a liking to me. He kind of knew my family a little bit. Dude was ripped. He was like 6 years old, would run with us, had hairy chest and abs. And here we are, young 20s, just like dying behind this guy. And he was just, oh man, incredible people. They gave me my first spark. And I've thanked all of them. And thank God I got to thank Matt Negley. Matt Negley. If you all don't know, unfortunately, Matt Negley is no longer with us, but I'm so proud that I got to tell him what he meant to me. That means a lot to me. I knew it meant a lot to him as well. They were very instrumental in me in kickstarting my career and seeing what this career is about. And I was all in, man. I went from like hating school. I read the whole It's the Firefighter 1 and 2 book. I've never read a book at this time before in my life. Highlighted, studied, got A's on all the tests. I got top practical student in my class. I was loving it. And I started, like, they didn't know they were mentoring me on ultimately into my teaching career. And I give them credit for my teaching career because I would sit there and watch them interact with students. Say, like, I would always volunteer to be the safety for the 24-foot ladder throw because I could sit there and, you're just there to like make sure the student doesn't drop the ladder, right? And you would see all the mistakes and all the wins that these guys, the student was making. But better is I get to see the interaction that JJ Cassetta was having with the student and seeing how he was critiquing the student, how he would be tough when he needed to be tough and how he was warm when he needed to be warm and to grow us. Dude, that was awesome. And so I am out of school and ready to apply for every job I could find. And in Florida, that's what you got to do. You got to get your firefighter 1 and 2, and you got to have EMT, and then you can go apply any county or city job in the state. And that's what I did. But
you were saying how in your write-up that Winter Park had a nepotism rule, so you were sort of initially ruled out from working for the same department as your dad.
Yeah, that's crazy. So I applied everywhere in Central Florida, besides one department I didn't have a desire to work for, but I applied everywhere. And my dad I was like, hey, you should apply to Winter Park just to push the subject. Like, let them tell you cannot work here. So at the time I was getting on a job at the coast, had the chief's acceptance, was getting 4 days before I was getting sized up for gear. The Winter Park fire chief at the time, Jim White, calls me and is like, hey, Eric, the union and myself approached the city. We said, We told them this nepotism law, kind of outdated. It had been like 30 or 40 years and they never looked back, never looked into it again. And he approached the city and the union and everything. It was like, hey, we got a guy's son that's going to test here. And what if he gets number one? Are we going to tell him he can't work here? And so they overturned that and got the rule changed. And he's like, I would like you to come apply. Mind you, I was 4 days away from basically grabbing my gear and getting this job at the coast. I called my dad and told him, and he was like, what should I do? And of course, he basically said, it's up to me. Deep down, obviously, he wanted me to be with him. And so I called that fire department. I was like, hey, unfortunately, I appreciate it, but I got to bail out. And mind you guys, I haven't even tested for Winter Park yet. It wasn't like they gave me a job offer and I had to go through a whole process again. And so I took it seriously. I studied my butt off for all the processes, did really well on the test, and ultimately got hired with like 4 or 5 other guys and got on the City of Winter Park. It's a dream job. In our area, it's one of the places to be, and it's pretty cool.
What was the recruit experience like?
There's some things that I wish we do different. I wish our, what we call orientation, or some people call pro-e school, I wish we go a little more in depth than that. We're pretty quick. It's like 2 weeks. You do some recruit stuff for 2 weeks and then you're on. Nowadays, it's a little bit more okay because most of our hires come from other jobs, so they got a good foundation. But at the time, we were all brand new, and I think maybe 1 out of the 5 of us came from another job. But the one good thing that I think came out of that, though, was Jim Walsh. And people are going to recognize Jim Walsh, the guy who started VentEnterSearch.com. He was the training captain at the time, and we were his first probie class. So, of course, he was not only is extremely skillful of designing content and things like that, and delivery of content, he was brand new in that official role. So he was super excited, right? So we probably had the best orientation, I would think, since I've been hired that I've seen, the most organized and the most in-depth. And that's where I met I did meet my next mentor and my biggest mentor of my fire service career right there. And him and I built a relationship all the way up until he retired. I saw him actually yesterday, but we still have a relationship, but he retired and obviously I don't see him as much now, but it was a great experience. Yeah, I got thrown to the wolves right after that.
And how were the rookie years?
They were good. I mean, overall, I had a great experience. The guys took care of me pretty well. It wasn't really until probably towards the end of my first year, and I just kept getting more and more into diving headfirst into everything I could, taking all my truck classes and special operations certs and learning as much as I could. But I noticed that I was so into it, and there was a lot of guys there that were not. When I got hired, the next youngest person to me was 10 years older than me. Winter Park has an extremely retention rate, which leads to huge generational gaps, right? So, you get hired there, you don't go anywhere else. We haven't lost somebody in another fire department in almost 20 years. Back in those days, I was working guys that were hired on in the late 70s. Some of those guys were hired on in the late 70s. And at those times, the city went through some pretty nasty financial issues and things like that. And I just think that was just kind of the culture of the department where you weren't into the job. It wasn't cool to be into the job.
It soured them a little bit.
Yeah, soured them. And they took it out on young Buck Wheaton, who came here and was like, this is crazy. I won the lotto. I love it. I'm reading magazines. Social media wasn't a huge thing back then, but I'd read magazines. I'd watch training minute videos. And I would have to hide that because people would come and walk through the bay and I'm sitting on the bumper reading a Firehouse magazine or Fire Engineer magazine, and they would poo-poo me or laugh at me, or how many times I've been told, hey kid, this is a marathon, not a sprint, or I'd like to see you when you got 10 years on. And I go, I surpassed 10 years. All right, I'd like to see you when you got 15. I surpassed 15. I'd like to see you when you're 40. Okay, I'm coming to 40, and I just feel like every year I get more and more into it. So that part hurt. I was kind of taken back because I didn't know. And so what I ended up doing is going to a local conference. And it was the Orlando Fire Conference, which happens to be ran by Matt Negley, Steve Negley, and JJ Cassetta.
Perfect.
So I show up to that year. I take a forced entry class randomly. And guess who's that lead instructor? Mike Champo.
Wow.
And Champo is an extremely big mentor of mine. He's extremely kind to my family and my kids and his daughters and his wife. We get together at Pensacola Beach in August every year, and JJ brings his families there. It's just a good time, right? This guy ultimately becomes a huge mentor of mine in this space. And I am completely blown away that I'm standing around with 300 other firefighters having the same amount of passion and the same complaints I had. And I had no clue, because at this time, all I knew was Winter Park Fire Department. And I started to realize and open my mind that the fire service is much more than what I ever thought it was, and that there's a lot of people in my shoes that are extremely excited to work there or at their jobs, but get beat down for being into the job. And that was my kickstarting to attending as many fire conferences as I could, because it was like a drug. It was an addiction, right? It was that addiction that I had kind of ingrained into me. And so I just started showing up to everything. And then that led to helping out and just like the back end, resetting props and all that. And then just kind of steamrolled into where I'm at today with all that. But I give credit to every conference, every small, large conference. Keep hosting them, because it saved me. I probably would have been sucked into that cancer and just continue that cancer down into the toxic culture that potentially would have led to. And if you walk in the doors of Winter Park now, it's completely different.
And you're tripping over legends down there.
Tripping. I mean, like crazy.
Right.
And all kinds of conversations from there, man, for sure.
So why'd you choose to promote?
I always had it in my heart that I wanted to be a formal leader in my department. I think it started more selfishly because I was a little rubbed raw that first year. And I was like, these guys complaining about me, I could run circles around them, right? And so I was like, well, screw everybody. I'm worried about myself. I'm going to make myself look good. I'm going to be the best firefighter I can be. And I almost made it like a competition. And when you're a firefighter, you're worried about yourself coming in the job lead. So you're kind of worried about yourself. You're making sure you're getting the skills, and you have no formal leadership over anybody. You're not in charge of anybody. And so basically, I just tried to be the best firefighter I could be. And ultimately, I just wanted to be the best firefighter in my department, whether I was cocky about it or not. I'm sure to this day, people still think it rubs that way. I like to think not, but I wanted to be the best I could. And I wanted the chief, my battalion, my lieutenant to be like, hell yeah, Wheaton's working today. I know things are going to get done. I know if I have an emergency scene, I want him up front and centered. That was my mindset. I started noticing as I had a couple years on that younger guys would come on and they would gravitate towards that. If they weren't around me and they were going to go kind of read a magazine in front of some other salty guy, they were going to get kind of picked fun of. So they can come out back with me. We can put gear on. We can throw ladders. We can search the bay. We can climb the high-rise stairs with the high-rise hose. And then I started feeling like, oh my God, like there's guys like doing this. And I like leading them to do this and then showing them the way. And just every year we would hire more people. And I was really enjoying the fact that I could show somebody and I could be the example of the person I would want to follow, right? That I've always had that mindset. It's like, I want to be the same person that if I was coming up from the firefighter rank, I would want to follow me. And then people started having personal conversations with me. Like, hey, this guy's kind of saying these things to me and you seem to be into it. Like, can you kind of tell me what I need to do? And I just really enjoyed that part of it. And once I started mature and realized, hey, this job's not about yourself. I started realizing, man, if I could become a company officer, I now don't worry about me. I worry about we, and I can build a whole team now, like a force multiplier. And then two, I love training. And if you're not really in a formal role at the fire department, you can kind of do some trainings here and there, but like to have a real formal presence in the training, you needed to be an officer. And those are some of those motivations that I used to decide to take that test.
Did you start helping with training outside of your crew and more for your department? And then how did that transition into outside your department?
Yeah, so I started definitely at the one or two people and doing our air consumptions out back. We would just put on gear and I would say, hey, just took this class with Mike Champo, how to force a door. He's a New York City firefighter, 45 truck, Washington Heights of Manhattan. I mean, here we are in Winter Park. I'm just going to show you what he taught me. A lot of old guys didn't like that. If they saw me out there doing that, they're like, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm just a messenger, dude. I'm just passing on what he showed me." So it started like that, and then slowly you would see these guys kind of hanging out in the bay, right? These what I consider guys that would kind of cause some cancer, and they would start to kind of lean in, and then you would see them, and then they would say, "Hey, would you just show him?" Right? And then I would show him, and he's like, "Wow, that's kind of cool." And then just over time, they see the work that you're putting in. They vet you through some performance they see on a fire ground or on an emergency scene. And I'm going to more and more conferences and get more and more confident with how to deliver this stuff back to the people in my own department. And then the training division starts inviting me. "Hey, we got a new class coming in. Do you mind doing the ladders portion?" "Oh yeah, for sure. I'll definitely help out." And then I got picked up by our local fire academy and doing some classes out there. The Orlando Fire Conference was looking for a new class one year, and this must have been 2011 or 2012, somewhere around there. I was actually attending a class at the State College with Steve Negley, who now runs the Orlando Fire Conference. Like, "Hey, we want to bring a new class. We're thinking about something with a water can." And Winter Park had an extremely strong culture with a water can, and I was like, "Yeah, I'll design a program of what we do." And he's like, "Sure, what are you going to call it?" And I was like, "Can confidence." Like literally just spat that out. And it's funny because like as the class got popular in the early year or two of it, I hated that name. But then the class and the title got kind of popular and everything. So everyone's like, "Oh, you can't change it now." I was like, "All right, whatever." But anyways, so that was my first invite to teach at a conference as an actual instructor. I had a couple years where I was kind of in the back end helping champ, like reset doors, getting the cooler of ice down for after the conference, doing runs to the airport to pick up other instructors, kind of helping out that way. So, I was getting a lot of mentorship on delivery and content and things like that. And then I would go test it on younger guys in my department that I felt comfortable enough to do that. And then, that kind of kick-started and it snowballed from there.
And then how did you get involved with Jim Walsh and VentEnterSearch?
Again, we hit it off right from orientation because I was a nerd into the fire service, and he had the library, right? He's kind of credited that the website's kind of credited as being like the first firefighter blog style website that was around. I'm sure there might have been some others, but that's just at that time in the mid 2000s. I mean, that's just everybody who was a firefighter knew about VentEnterSearch.com. And so that was really cool having that there in my own home. I kind of kept pushing him. I'm like, "Hey, can I help out with anything on the website?" I didn't know anything about web design or anything like that. And he's like, "Yeah, kind of just help me filter through. I get a ton of submissions of articles. Just kind of help me filter through and then push the ones that you think would be cool to me. And then I'll edit and review and do a post on it." I'm like, "Okay." And so we'd meet up like once a month at a coffee bar, brewery, and just knock out some work. And I kept pushing him like, "Dude, you're starting to get invited to do lectures and stuff. We should do hot." And he was always hesitant, insurance and all this stuff. And because the Orlando Fire Conference gave me that opportunity, I went ahead and just put it under the VentEnterSearch umbrella. And I was like, "Hey, I'm doing this at the Orlando Fire Conference." I think it was 1 year I kind of ran it just with myself and a good friend of mine is now my battalion. And then that next year it was like, "Hey, this is VentEnterSearch's class now." That's kind of how I got dug into the VentEnterSearch and how that molded with the conference. And I guess ultimately to finally take ownership of the company was in 2017. Jim was in line. I mean, he was teed up to be our fire chief. And as a good leader would do, he was like, "Look, I can't have a side project. I got to solely focus on the fire department. I sure as hell can't have a side project with a firefighter," right? He was like, "I want you to take this and run with it." And I said, "Absolutely." And unfortunately, a week to the day that he gave me the business, he had a catastrophic stroke on duty and unfortunately had a medical out of the job. And it was extremely heartbreaking for him, for me, for the fire department. He's such a good dude. I knew it hurt him to leave like that. He's loving life now, guys. So people ask me every once in a while, "How's Jim doing?" I just saw him yesterday at a retirement party doing great, loves hanging out with his family every day now. He's so into fitness right now. He's been rucking a lot. He looks great shape, way better shape than when he worked there. He wasn't out of shape, but he was like, now he's like, I was telling him yesterday, I'm like, man, you're looking ripped. So he's in good spirits. Yeah, that's how I ended up kind of taking VentEnterSearch and running with it. So it's been fully with me since 2017.
And what conferences are you taking that to?
Too many to list. I mean, I've pretty much every conference in the state of Florida, several around the country. We do a lot of, like, a fire department will kind of bring us on, even more so than conferences. FDIC, we landed that this year. That's obviously a big one for us, and we're looking forward to that. But yeah, pretty much, I mean, I got a pretty booked up calendar this year. I think I'm booked up till about September right now, where 1 or 2 trips a month we're somewhere in the country, and a good chunk of those are conferences. So Idaho's got a cool one coming up in March. That's probably our next out of state one.
FDIC at all?
Yeah, so we scored FDIC this year. I've been with teaching hot class at FDIC since 2017 with Grant Schwalbe's crew. Incredible crew.
Wow. Yeah.
It broke my heart to leave those. I got, when you have good friends and mentors that push you to do uncomfortable things, right? That was that cadre of guys pushed me to do something very uncomfortable, because I was very comfortable showing up and not being a lead of a program and showing up teaching. And the relationship I have with that crew is, those group of guys are very unique group. It was sad that I was getting pushed to do that, but they wanted me to take that opportunity and chance. And I'm thankful that the FDIC advisory board gave me this opportunity, and I put together a really good cadre of guys. Most of them are really good friends of mine. We have some newcomers that I've been looking at working with for many, many years. So I think we have a good group together. I know we have a good group together, but we're looking for that. But it's Can Confidence, a live fire, searching for life and fire program. So it's going to be a good time.
Awesome. And you leveled up to working with the UL as well.
Yeah, got submitted to be on the advisory board for the or tech panel member for the search and rescue study. Up until that point, it was really only suppression and ventilation they had been looking at, which, not that everyone has their wheelhouses, but let's face it, I'm not going to go add any value to ventilation or a suppression study. However, I felt like I could add value to the search. Our department's extremely search driven, so I felt I could add value to that. Plus, with all my time with VentEnterSearch at the time and being in that genre of teaching, I felt it would be cool to be a part of that. Unfortunately, our group, which came together in 2019, got rocked by COVID and was not allowed to meet in person through the rest of our time. And in fact, when we got to do the experiment burns, we were only allowed like 2 or 3 tech panel members on site at a time, right? So that part was a bummer, but I feel the report came out very well, confirmed a lot of what we were kind of thinking, right? So vetted a lot of things that traditions that were passed down. There's some new highlights, but I think overall people were like, "Yep, cool, we got it. This is what we've been doing. We're going to continue down this path." So,
how much does your department look into what the UL has done and sort of confirm or add things? Like, how much are they using it now in your work?
It drives the training division. As far as like anything written in policy, that probably hasn't changed so much. It would just take somebody, say myself, to say, hey, we should put in policy if we find somebody that every chance we can protect the airway or something like that, right? But as far as training goes, absolutely. I mean, we just did a big search training for the entire department in October, and that was hit on heavily. A lot of the UL stuff was brought up in that training session, not only how we're moving the victim as far as physically move them, but how we're going to egress with that victim. The times to go out the way we came in versus time to bring them into a bedroom, isolate and ventilate and take them out a window, right? And so, yeah, it has influenced my department. Not only that, but before the study even came out, we were involved to do the time to task. I took my whole department and I did time drills on everything search related, including like some forcible entry stuff and all that. And you can see those results when you go through any of the online programs, and they even give you the time to task sheet if you want to do that in your own department. And that's the numbers that we got out of that were averaged out, and that's how we figured out how long it takes to drag a victim head first, or how long does it take them to drag feet first? How long does it take to do a window removal? All the departments on the tech panel that participated in that's their times averaged out.
It's great to, and Grant's obviously part of this too with grabs and everything, but you guys talk more about how VentEnterSearch is just search, right? Like it's just search. You're just entering from a different location, even finding a victim from the inside, and then it's just enter search vent, right? Or
the guys that are pushing that really give me a hard time saying need to change the name of my company.
Of the company, right?
Oh, yeah. I think Ron Smith went on a podcast one time and told me that. But I'll say this. First of all, this could be an unpopular opinion. I don't really get in the weeds about what we're calling things. I'll give you this example. For us, for my fire department, if someone gets on the radio and says they're doing a VentEnterSearch, that is merely telling everybody on scene, obviously most importantly, the truck company officers and the commanding officer, the chief officer, that they're entering a window for search. If you hear anybody on our radio say they're doing a primary search, we're entering from a doorway. So it's almost now as if it's just an entry point. They're not tied to a single room. They're not tied to always going outside the room. It's merely for us a point of entry. And we do like the beyond the doors type stuff a little bit differently, whereas it's traditionally taught that beyond the door stuff where two firefighters enter in through the same window or the same room and then basically start their search from there. What we typically do is break our outside team of two into one and one. One will dive in one bedroom. One will dive into another bedroom via window if they're doing the VentEnterSearch and start their search. They'll basically search two separate rooms simultaneously.
Split search starting from outside.
Exactly. And again, it's merely an entry point for our members when you hear that term. So for us, we have no need to change those terminologies as of now, unless someone comes up with something else that sounds like, okay, man, maybe we should rethink this. I think I'm aligning with what is said out there, but I just don't, for us, it's no.
I think some of the reluctance with departments that have trucks that will do search without a hose line, it doesn't seem that far of a stretch. For departments that are very stuck to, you have to have a hose line with you wherever you go at all times, then I think that's where the VentEnterSearch into a single room becomes, well, you can't go past that because now you're not safe, right? It becomes a safety thing.
Exactly. And we got to also realize we just got the American Fire Service comfortable with allowing, especially in the suburban areas, allowing members to dive through a window and search one room. And now you want to say, oh, that's wrong, or you should always go beyond the door, or you should just call it search. It's like, hey, I've traveled a lot of places and chiefs would come up to me like, hey, look, this is the first time we're doing this. I need your help to write this policy. We're going to do a two-person where one guy stays at the window. I'm like, hey, that's a starting point. And then I just advise them, hey, you can grow from there. And I give the example where we'll put two people, guy in one room, one guy in the other room, and go from there. So people have to realize every fire department's at a different level of comfort with that skill. And it's going to be hard to just say, hey, you're doing it wrong by only sticking to one room. We got to kind of understand people have different skilled firefighters, right? You go to fire departments and it's they probably shouldn't even be diving into one room. And again, back to the terminology thing, this is what I was trying to remember is the same thing with vacant. We get a lot of what I call a vacant building to do training in. And I like to show my department off. People know that. And I'll post hey, we got another vacant. We're doing some training. I've had people write me that are pretty well known in the fire service too, that it's not a vacant, it's a derelict building. It's dude, you're on the whole other side of the country over where my city of Winter Park, because I call a building vacant, we don't discount that as nobody inside, dude. That's just what we call it. The truck's going to go and do a search, the engine's going to go put the fire out, whether it appears to be occupied or not. In fact, we have an extremely strong culture that if the building to us would be defined as vacant, if it's on fire, well, how did it catch on fire? If it's vacant, it's got no power to it. It wasn't a lightning strike. Something must have started something, right? So again, it's we only know what we know and what we're in tune with. And because somebody somewhere else says something a different way or does something a different way, doesn't mean that we don't understand what's going on. Just because I call a building vacant, of course I know that's not necessarily vacant, and we're occupying the building. Obviously now it's not vacant. Like I don't need to be told that. Like I get it. It's just, that's what we say. That's our terminology and it works for us. And I don't discount anybody's other opinion. And it comes with what I always say is having an open mind. And it's something big I've learned in the fire service. And as I get as an adulthood is with any topics non-related to fire, just have an open mind. Don't be closed-minded and take in the information, critical think, and stuff like that. I enjoy, as I learn to do that, I enjoy navigating that thought process.
It is funny how a lot can't, they may have a thought process and a perspective in one regard. Like everything is flames and skulls on t-shirts and I fight what you fear and we show up on people's worst day, but we can't go beyond the door because it's dangerous. You're fully embedded with a thought process in one regard and you talk out of the other side of your mouth in another. That always fascinates me.
We do that, and I'm fully on board with all that. It just, I'm okay with calling it VentEnterSearch, and that just means I'm entering through a window.
We call our trucks and engines aerials and pumpers. It doesn't mean they're not fire trucks.
Exactly.
Something recent, you just released the Book of Mentors, which is phenomenal. Whether it's intentional or not, but it's kind of in the same style as, say, the Book of Andy and the Book of Shoop. Like it looks very similar. Like I love it. So just talk to me about that.
My mom actually texted me when she saw that I released that. She's like, she didn't know I was working on that. She's like, how do you have time to do it? Like, how'd you have time to do that? And I just wrote back, I didn't. So I kind of got remotivated to finish it because we had two new hires. One just started yesterday. So the goal was to have it done for them. It partly goes back to when I first got hired and I was getting bashed for dropping some names that I felt like people should know. Like, oh, I just took a class from Kurt, or I just took a class from whoever, Mike Lombardo, whatever. And they would be like, I don't care, who's that? And at that same dinner table, they would spat out and I don't care about football at all. So I'm a little illiterate when it comes to some of these terms, but they would just spat out every athlete, their stat. I'm talking about, they know who won the game in the 80s. What shoe size, how much money they make, like what team they play for. I'm just like completely blown away. And I wouldn't care if those guys were like not beating me down for being in the job, but like you have all that mental capacity to take all that in. And then you don't know one person in the fire service. And again, I would not care. I start caring when you're beating me down or now you're beating a younger guy down. Right. So the final was like, the idea of the project was we're watching a video of a fire service instructor that everybody should know. I was completely blown away that one of the guys who had some decent amount of time on at the time was like, who's this old guy? And I was like, you don't know who this is? like kind of like an old guy. What does he know? You know?
Right.
And I was like, that's it. This is now my responsibility, right? Because I know of all these people, if not personally, and I know a lot of their attributes and their accomplishments. And I'm like, I felt like I was hoarding it now. This made me realize, okay, I'm hoarding this. I need to let people know in my own agency. That was the original thing. And then I started thinking about, like, wait a minute. Every time I go to a conference, everybody has the same complaints. Like, man, I'm the only one into it. Nobody knows who this is and what they represent and how good of a firefighter they are. And I was like, man, I'm just going to do this document. I'm going to put it out for free for people to just run with it. And so I started working on that, and I quickly realized, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a big project. So I made an Excel spreadsheet of some names, and ultimately grew to like 60 names. And then I was just going to have a spreadsheet with the like name and some of the highlights, what I think of them or things that I know with some minimal research or just things I know. And I was like, I looked at this document, I'm like, there's no way anyone can even read this. It's just cluttered with words. And I was like, man, I would like to put a picture to the name or a face to the name. Got the idea to have one big picture. And I was like, I want just one page. I could be here for a year typing everybody's accomplishments and things like that. So I wanted bam, a picture, a name, the rank, the last that I know of, and a few attributes and genres that they're known for. And some of the guys that have articles or videos or books, I would say, hey, or podcasts or whatever, I'd say, hey, that way. So the reader is like, hey, engine company operations. Oh, wow, Kurt, man, he's got a good list of stuff. It looks like he's pretty involved with some conferences. Let me look him up.
Here's the door to the rabbit hole.
Exactly. So search his name, pick all his articles, follow him on social media. Oh, wow, he does conferences in the state of Florida. I live in Florida. I'm going to go to one of these conferences. And that's what it was. I got a lot of good positive feedback from it. The one thing I do want people to realize is, because I've had people like, oh, you should add this guy, you should add this guy. It's like, the book is the fire service now. Like, I'm not going to sit there and add anybody to the list that's out there publicly. I may add as I go through my career for my people in my circles, specifically my department. The idea is to save on your computer, and then you add you change. Hey, maybe you're not a fan of this guy and you want to take him out, or I have some wrong information about the guy, you want to correct it. Like, it's a living document for you guys to run with. I just wanted to throw out the idea and do the platform like that. So I thought it was a cool document. I'm pretty proud of it. And I actually gave our 2 new people this morning and yesterday, and they lit up. So I'm glad I did it.
Is it a living document on, like, say, Google, where I could go in and add a picture and a write-up?
Yeah, so I'm not extremely tech savvy. So right now it's just a PDF, and I know you probably have to have like an edited version of PDF to add to it, I'd assume.
Or you could make a Google Doc of it and just have it on Google Drive, and then anybody and everybody can dive in and edit that document.
I should actually probably look into that for sure. But yeah, that was my intent, though, is to just let it go. So you guys add, take away. The goal is to pass it around. If you like how it is, then print it out and pass it around to the people that need it.
And maybe for these sports guys, we need to start selling Mike Champo jerseys.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure.
Why can't I walk around with a jersey with Mike Champo's name on the back of it, right?
Yeah, crazy. Yeah.
What's coming up with you in the next little while then? I know you mentioned conferences, but
I got a lot of projects for sure. People say, like, how am I doing this? We're at work. We're building our next tiller truck, so I'm on the spec committee for that. We go to Wisconsin here in a few days. I'm trying to work with our peer fitness committee and bridge the couple connections I've made through CrossFit and have our fire department affiliate and become a CrossFit gym. Pretty passionate about that. Those 2 things are kind of keeping me busy as far as my own job. And then, of course, family, wife, 3 kids, trying to live a healthy lifestyle and show them a healthy lifestyle as best I can. And then the conferences and classes that I'm doing. So those are all pretty big jobs for me.
How can people get a hold of you if they want to reach out to you?
Like to think I'm fairly active on social media. Is probably the easiest way to get me. Instagram is ericwheaton.61. I have an old one that was like CanmanFF, but the account got locked out. So don't go follow that one. Just the Eric Wheaton 61, Eric Wheaton on Facebook. And if anyone wants to email me, you can go to VentEnterSearch.com and just contact us page. Or if you remember, it's eric@VentEnterSearch.com. And Eric is ERIC. But yeah, I'm always happy to help. I'm constantly sending people documents if they're, hey, what's your truck SOG, stuff like that. I don't mind doing all that. So reach out and we'll link up.
Awesome, man. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, thank you.